Pursuant to Article 4, Section 19 of the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, NISCA moves that the rule therein be suspended and an urgency be declared, and that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that Senate File Number 2 be given its second and third readings and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize Representative Niska to explain the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Senate File 2 is the energy bill. It's part of the work that we need to get done today, and I urge members to support the motion.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also recommend that people support the motion.
All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill a second reading.
Second reading, Senate File Number 2.
Second reading. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File Number 2, an act relating to energy, appropriating and transferring money for energy and renewable development accounts.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Acom, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. We're marching right down this line of bills tonight. So happy to talk to you a little bit about the energy bill. It's looking a little different now coming back from conference committee. And in some ways that's good, and in other ways not so good. I think that when we left the House floor, we had been given a zero target. And so in our combined targets, we had a $4 million cut per biennium. And so unfortunately, we had to make that cut in the weatherization program, which I think is an unfortunate choice, but we didn't have a lot of choice because of the way the Department of Commerce budget is set up. So that's the bad news. And so that was disappointing. But members, what I will say is some good news is that we did include some some bipartisan and non-controversial policy provisions to the bill.
Members, please take your conversations to the alcoves or the retiring room. Representative Acom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Of those policy provisions, there were a couple of extensions for some RDA projects, one for the St. Thomas microgrid, the other for a rooftop solar array on the National Sports Center. So great that they will be able to continue to access the funds that we had previously appropriated to them. There was a couple of technical fixes that we were able to include in the bill. One is a definition of low income for the Home Energy Assistance Program. Another is adding the tribal nations as eligible recipients for our geothermal planning grants. Another good thing. And then we had two bipartisan bills. One was securitization, and honestly, this is a bill that has been traditionally carried by Democrats. This year was carried by a Republican, and it's a good bill to ensure that when unforeseen things happen with our utilities. Several years ago, we had a large cold snap that went all the way down into Texas, you may recall. Winter Storm Uri, it was called, and it drove up the prices of natural gas. And it made it incredibly expensive for utility payers, and so this bill will help to allow the utilities to spread those costs over a number of years to make those bills not quite so high. So it's a good bill that will help make keep our utilities affordable. And then we also changed the definition of large energy facility in terms of storage tanks for natural gas. Representative Sexton carried that bill. And so those are the things that we added to it. I think overall it's still a pretty skinny bill. I think that in our divided government, the fact that we were able to get as much done as we did is good, and along the way we also worked hard to protect many of the gains that we had already had. So with that, Madam Speaker, I will turn it over to others who may have comments.
I recognize a member from Lyon, Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. You know, the energy bill that sits before you has changed quite a little bit from when it left the House as it came out of committee. Worked very hard to make some real inroads. The Senate bill versus the House bill, as they left committee, were drastically different bills. The bills coming out of the Senate had a spectrum of great issues. CSG reform, net metering, and working with the RDA. And, you know, working with Senator Friends and standing hand in hand, the Republican caucus in the Senate, the DFL caucus in the Senate, and the Republican caucus here in the House, we're standing strong on looking at some very baseline reforms that, quite frankly, need to happen. In the energy space, it's no surprise to anyone if you've talked to any business owners across the state or anybody within the energy space. Minnesota has passed the 2040 bill. That's a carbon-free mandate on energy producers to be carbon-free by 2040. And the legislature continues to say that we have an opinion on how we get there, rather than let the market dictate how that's going to happen. And I think the legislature swung and missed an opportunity here this session to really pull back, get out of the way, take our thumb off the scales of energy production here in our state to allow the market to dictate how to get there. Whether that's industrial solar, whether that's wind, whether that's large hydro, whatever that might be, or even potentially lifting the moratorium on nuclear energy here in Minnesota. And, you know, those are the things that we really need to be looking at. So as we set vision, members here in the Minnesota House, we have 134 members. And I would challenge each and every single one of you to push past giving ourselves relevancy here on this floor and give the market and give the industries the right and the ability to go after it the way they best seem fit. Not choosing winners and losers, not making sure that our friends are profitable, but get out of the way and allow energy to produce where it can be produced the cheapest, most efficiently, and the safest manner possible. So while I wish this bill was potentially even thinner than it is as it comes before us, I wish it had a lot more in different areas when it comes to policy. So appreciate it. I appreciate staff. I appreciate nonpartisan staff for hard work, dedication. I appreciate the DFLer staff. I appreciate Indy and AJ standing in the alcove, and the hard work and dedication to all the caucus members, the committee members that sat on the committee and heard the bills that really matter to Minnesotans across the state. We've got some real interesting days ahead of us, whether it be the issues of data centers and how we have an opportunity to actually attract data centers to the state rather than do everything we can do to discourage them by creating an atmosphere of dysfunction and calm, or we can move forward and get the job done for Minnesotans when it comes to cheap, reliable, safe, efficient energy in Minnesota. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 2.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Meckland.
Got me a little quicker than I expected there, Madam Speaker. So as Chair Swedensky just said, there's this could have been a lot better. The Senate had a lot of much better provisions in it. However, for my fourth energy budget, this is the best energy bill I've ever seen. Thank goodness we had a split house. As Chair Acom mentioned, one of the most disappointed parts was they didn't fund the weatherization. Luckily, in her data center bill, she'll get more than that out of one data center annually. Another interesting thing, our local paper came out this last Friday, and there's a new spurring market with solar. Representative Schultz's constituent has a thriving business of renting out 2,500 sheep every year to go graze the grass under the solar panels. My understanding is they will make more money doing this with sheep than you could possibly make whether you're shearing the wool or raising it for meat. So I'm sure that well, I won't mention their name, this particular farmer is pretty pleased. I've heard it's quite thriving up there. I'm a little undecided where I'm at with this, and I'll speak later, certainly on the data center bill, but I do generally mean, of all the ones I've seen for the fourth one, this is by far the least painful. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, at some point we need to get a little bit more intelligent, long range in our thinking. Tillable land isn't where you put solar panels. This year, during the early summer, well, just weeks ago, hail went through, broke up panels, but because it was on that tillable land and where the water drainage was, you ended up having some of those rare earths that are bad getting into the soil. If you want to do it, Rochester Airport, they want to put it above the parking area. So if you've got something like that, you gain the fact that cars are parked underneath, they're protected from the rain, snow, hail. But if you did have something like that happen, you've got a surface that you can clean up any of those contaminants. And the other thing that we don't seem to be doing is realizing electric vehicles aren't the greatest for our part of the world. In the winter, the mileage and range is worse. My son bought one, and he had it for a few years, and it didn't work out. But what would work out is multiple major companies have new generation hydrogen fuel cell and hydrogen engines, and they had a truck go over 1,700 miles on a fill. 300 miles versus 1,700. In the wintertime, you don't give up half your mileage range. In an ag area that has winter, we should be pursuing hydrogen. We've got windmills idle because the grids are full. You have an electrolysis system to get hydrogen out so you can use that when the wind's blowing but the grid's full. That way you'd have hydrogen generation across the state, and we could facilitate an intelligent next generation of vehicles. But we're tying to the 100% electric, let's go solar, we need to think ahead of the past. This bill doesn't. I can't support continuing stuff that isn't going to be where we need to be. I'm voting no.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. One thing that the Chair Swedzinski said that I agree with, there are interesting days and years ahead of us. And Representative Quam, I really appreciate your ideas, different ways of thinking about things. I wish we could have more of that. I am proud of this bill. It's a simple bill. I'm proud that we're funding government, proud that we've defended attempts to roll back our clean energy by 2040 law and also to destroy our thriving renewable energy market. But it is a lost opportunity to make more progress on climate change. One example, it's a lost opportunity that we didn't invest in the renewable development account projects, bipartisan renewable development account projects on green hydrogen, green ammonia, geothermal, as well as Energy Alley, which is doing great work and seeks to create an innovation ecosystem and jobs, clean energy jobs engine in Minnesota. Lost opportunity. 3 things happened since this bill left the House floor that I want to speak about that I think reinforce the need for more action. First, the reconciliation bill passed the U.S. House. There's many things about it, but one is it would basically be a full repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the first federal action that was actually on the scale necessary to give us a shot at addressing climate change. If this happens, it will increase U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 500 million metric tons by 2030 and 1 billion tons by 2035, which is the equivalent of operating 220 coal-fired power plants for a year. Not to mention the additional air pollution we'll have. And because renewables are the cheapest source of energy, this misguided reconciliation bill will raise electricity rates 9% by 2030, 17% by 2035, total of $50 billion in added costs for households and businesses per year. You talk about rate relief, Chair Swedzinski, we need to advocate against this bill. It will reduce cumulative clean energy investments by $1 trillion over the next decade. And these markets in clean energy are some of the fastest growth, most exciting markets of the century, and we're going to cede them to China. Another reason why we need to do more here. Second thing, last week, wildfires. You know, this is climate change. You put more heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere, and guess what they do? They trap more heat. This trapped heat makes climate change makes hot and dry conditions worse, makes wildfires worse. Do you know that forest fires are burning more than twice as much tree cover today as 2 decades ago? And it's worse in Minnesota and places like Minnesota that are warming faster than the rest of the planet. 70% of all fire-related tree cover costs in the world occurred in northern boreal regions, like northern Minnesota. And Representative Scraba, last week, Grand Portage in your district hit an air quality index of 800. 800, this is the worst air quality ever reported in Minnesota. Not even close. It's so high that the index that folks have to track this, just at the red level, which is 151 to 200, says some members of the general public may experience health effects. The purple level, 201 to 300, health alert. The risk of health effects is increased for everyone. The maroon level, hazardous, is 301 to 500, health warning of emergency conditions. Everyone is more likely to be affected. 800, everyone at these levels should be not outdoors. And the third thing that happened since this bill left the floor is that my son graduated from high school. What's so hard about this is we're going to be looking back in 10 years when he's 28, or in 20 years when he's 38, looking back to 2025 as a time of cooler weather and fewer air quality index warnings. That's what's in store. You know, climate change, addressing it, requires some of the long-term thinking that Representative Quam mentioned, and requires systemic change. And systemic change, a key part of that is government. And so each and every one of us is part of that. Each and every one of us has an opportunity to make a difference, to do things that will have an impact here in Minnesota and that can be replicated elsewhere. So, as I said, I'm happy to support this bill. We protect key things, but my challenge to all is we need to do better. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for the discussion on this bill. I just wanted to say a couple quick things. One of the things that's in this bill today that I couldn't remember if it was mentioned, I wanted to make sure it's mentioned. It's really small, but I think it's going to make a huge difference, and it's changes to the State Competitiveness Fund that strikes out some words so that we can use that fund to go for other federal dollars, which is actually a really great thing. Because I know this chamber's talked a lot about some of the things we're seeing in D.C. is scary, but The Trump administration is doing a fantastic job on energy by doing executive orders on nuclear energy and many of the other things that we're seeing investments in coming out of DOE. So this small change in our policy bill today is actually going to set the state of Minnesota up to hopefully partner and receive millions of dollars in funding for energy projects here in the state of Minnesota. And that's something we talked a lot about in the Energy Committee. Whether it be solar and wind, which we're doing already and are great in their own way, we talked about a lot of other great things. Nuclear energy has turned into a really vibrant and strong conversation here at the state capitol, and I look forward to what's going to happen when we adjourn, going into interim and having conversations, continuing to work with the Prairie Island Indian community, as well as the stakeholders of Minnesota to bring nuclear energy back to Minnesota and partner with the federal government using something like the State Competitiveness Fund. It's going to be a really exciting time for energy diversification, so we can make sure to have that reliable and affordable energy that we need here in the state of Minnesota. One of those other things that I wish could be in the bill today, but I think the conversation's alive and well, is biomass. And Representative Kraft, you talked about the wildfires. Biomass is a solution to help us keep our forests more clear and clean so we don't have to worry about those fires as much. And it's a solution, and you and I have had some great conversations on this, and I look forward to continuing to have these conversations because I think there's a lot of solutions on energy that are on the table in front of us. They didn't make it into the bill today, but I really appreciate the relationships we're building and the conversations that we're having and some of the bills that are sitting on the General Register right now that we can pass in the future. So, and I also just want to thank my co-author on the securitization bill, Representative Hollins. Thanks for helping me present the bill and get the bill done. Happy that it's in the bill today. But with that, thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I don't particularly mind this energy bill. I think it keeps the lights on. But it would be nice, because I thought we were at the point, I thought we were there, where we had a bipartisan consensus on nuclear energy. Maybe we'll be there soon, but we're so close. Yes, nuclear energy is expensive, but if we want to move to clean baseload power, if we want a 100% mandate that doesn't result in mass death, we're going to need significant nuclear power. But just to make sure that we're working from, I don't know, an objective standpoint on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because that is a goal that many of us share. The number one cause of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is moving not from coal to solar, from coal to natural gas. And treating all these fossil fuels the same, like just assuming they're evil by existing, natural gas is incredibly valuable, not just as an energy source. In Minnesota, well, in the United States, natural gas is a waste product in some of our energy extraction. We have a tenth of the cost of Europe when it comes to natural gas. That leads to all sorts of industrial products that we can do at an incredibly effective price and lower energy costs and lower emissions. It's a win-win-win-win-win. So I understand the consternation when it comes to like coal and whatnot. Unfortunately, coal is very plentiful, but we can't be demonizing all of these fuels because the number one leader of reduced greenhouse gas emissions in the United States is a shift from coal to natural gas. The other thing I think we should have bipartisan consensus on that has been building is efficiency. Efficiency is one of the best things. But efficiency through mandates telling people that they have to have electric lawnmowers, which I do have an electric lawnmower and an electric car. I'm basically a communist. But we have things that I think we have bipartisan agreement on that just get caught up in the fact that we think Minnesota policy can prevent wildfires in other countries. We are a tiny slice, but what we can do is reduce our greenhouse gas emissions responsibly and make the lives better for our people. So the transition to electric vehicles can happen through market incentives. Moving from coal to natural gas, well, maybe we need some government intervention there. But the idea that we're going to move from coal to this fantasy where we're all going to have solar on our roofs when we live in a high humidity tundra doesn't make any sense. So my hope is this bill came out as kind of a, you know, we can't agree, so we're not going to do too much, which is how government should function, by the way. Government is not supposed to do things that don't have consensus. But we should be moving to a lower emission standpoint in a way that is efficient and doesn't tell people how to live their lives, for one. So thank you, Chair Swazinski, for working on this bill. Thank you, Chair Ankam, for working on this bill. I think there's a lot more common ground that gets caught up in ideological battles. So my hope is, especially going into the future, that we can focus on things we agree on that achieve mutual goals. Because it's there, but we just get tripped up. So thanks for everybody's work on this bill. I know, having been involved in a negotiation on one of these bills, I have a great sympathy for all people who have to deal with this. So, members, it's hard to say whether you should vote green or red on a bill that is more of a consensus bill, like a consensus for lack of consensus bill, but I'm going to vote green because when we don't have full agreement, government isn't supposed to make drastic changes. That's how the system's designed, and I can live with that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Lyon, Representative Swazinski.
Vote red or green, you can choose.
I recognize the author, Representative Acom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, appreciate the comments and the conversation, and I really want to thank Representative Igo for bringing up the changes to the State Competitiveness Fund. That's a really big change, and I think I agree with you wholeheartedly that that will have a big impact on our state. So thank you for bringing that up, and I appreciate you also pinch hitting on the working group. So appreciate that, and thank you to all the committee members. On both sides of the aisle, appreciate the conversations we had in committee this year and the work that we have yet to do. So appreciate that, and especially a big thank you to Vice Chair Larry Kraft. Your perspective and your experience and your thoughts are always a good part of our conversation, so thank you. Want a special thank you to the nonpartisan staff. I see Bob Uleff back. I don't see Ashley Eng here, but is Ashley? There's Ashley. Okay. Thank you to nonpartisan staff and to partisan staff on both sides of the aisle. Really appreciate our committee would not function without you. So appreciate all of your help. And with that, I will just close in saying that I had two priorities for committee this year. The first was to pass a budget. And the second was to protect the gains that we've made over the last biennium in our transition to a clean energy economy. And this bill does both of those things. It protects so many of the gains that we've made, and we're passing a budget. So I encourage everyone to vote green. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Olson.
Senate File 2, Olson votes yes.
Olson votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 90 ayes and 41 nays, the bill is passed and its title is agreed to.